practitioners, organizations, and governments around the world trying to bring in the ideas of DPI and augmenting it with AI to solve for agriculture problems across the world. Yeah. I know we've had a heavy lunch, so I've thought I'd spruce it up a bit with a bunch of colorful slides to distract you. But what I wanted to stress upon the fact was, I mean, largely a phenomenon that you see across the world, but even more pronounced in the global south. We have a global hunger crisis. We have a deprivating climate situation around the world. All of this means the livelihood scenarios of our farmers and the associated farming classes are at risk. So how do we create something or a future of sorts where the global agriculture output has a revival scenario? I mean, as the data suggests, the global outputs are at its lowest in 6 odd decades. So there has to be a way by which we reverse the trend. And this alone is not enough. When we speak about agriculture, isn't just about farmers and farmer services and access to their livelihoods. We also need to be cognizant of the fact that we are looking at a scenario where there is a massive loss of biodiversity around the world. I mean, that comes, I know, with excessive urbanization, but the fact of the matter is, unless we solve for biodiversity, preserve and soil, water, air conditions, we won't necessarily have a lot of farms and farmers to deal with in the future. So given agriculture's role as one of the primary or probably the most important employment sector around the world, it's essential that we also solve for this while we address the core concerns of the farmers too. Like I said, so if we don't take a cognizant step towards the earlier concerns, we would probably be left with few farms, more people moving out of agriculture as a livelihood sector, and then essentially lesser families dependent on farming as a source of income. Now, what could all these problem statements be attributed to? I mean, there are several issues that hold the sector back in various jurisdictions. There is a massive fragmentation issue around the world. I mean, even if you just look at farmers per se, they have concerns ranging from how to use the best use of knowledge available to them in a more contextualized fashion so that they can apply it to their daily decision making. But at the same time, what they also need is access to commercialization opportunities. Farmers need access to markets. And the better use we have of making those linkages work, that's when the farmer livelihood scenarios actually improve and the farmer incomes double or triple over a span of 5 odd years. But climate change is an issue that we have to address, and that basically also means that we need to work towards looking at how we can have an infrastructure response to addressing the soil, water, air conditions worldwide. Now, as we've been hearing over the past couple of days, there are several ways to reverse the trend in this sector. Digital public infrastructure, as we have, several of us, even including in the room, have managed to accommodate within their own specific sectors. We believe that this is a way to synergize all of these efforts by looking at this as an infrastructure approach rather than individual solutions approach. Because one thing that we've learned from our couple of decades experience with DPI, there is never one lone hero as such, or one product or one solution that can solve for this. There's always a collective that is necessary to bring these solutions into the mainstream and make sure that we have a viable way of making available all of these services to the populations at large. So DPI provides a viable platform or a viable mechanism or a way of thinking to address all of these at population scale. And that's exactly or pretty much what we ascribe to when we say DPI. And this is, in a nutshell, what DPI represents, right? Purely from the lens of a technology response to a societal issue. If you were to look at the components or the building blocks that come with a DPI approach for solving large-scale sectoral issues, it's broken down to several segments. So there are issues on trust. that we need to solve for. There are issues on accessibility, issues on discoverability, issues on data ownership that we need to solve for. And what the last 10, 15 odd years, by the collective efforts from practitioners around the world, have basically led to is creation of building blocks that can solve for these issues at a population scale. So there are building blocks that address the identity question, the data sharing and consent question. There are building blocks that solve for digital payments, digital trust, tokenization, asset management, as well as in the recent couple of years by solving for the personalization experience by investing more and more into AI in a responsible way. So if you were to understand what DPI actually represents and what it does mean for several sectors, including agriculture, this is a way of looking at it from purely as a bunch of Lego blocks scenario. And while I say all of this, it's never just a tech response that solves this. It's always, as I've written at the top, it's a techno-policy community, collective effort that gets the job done. You need technology, you need solutions which are digital public goods. You need the private sector to participate. When you think about all of these things, unless you have the right techno-legal response to bring all these diverse actors, the public sector, the private sector, the open source community, the philanthropies, the research partners, under one collective or unified goal and ambition, with the right community mindset, it's exceedingly difficult to address these issues at a population scale. So that's one way of looking how DPI works. And with the right use of these building blocks and investments around these regions, countries can actually address these sectoral problems and productivity issues at a large scale. Yeah, so while we did all of this, I mean, if I were to just pick in my own bunch of experience, so over the past 10 odd years, while I worked on identity payments and so forth, I also were involved in some of the core social sectors. So my previous two stints were in education and health, and we did embrace a DPI approach in all of them. It took us a really long time to bring in a sense of standardization, a sense of common building blocks approach to those sectors, and we didn't have the advantage of some of these new exponential tech like AI then. But what that experience essentially also told us that for sectors that are quite similar in its problem statements, then we need this kind of a collective effort to come through. It's never a bunch of thinkers from one country or a couple of countries. You need a collective effort coming through by practitioners and organizations around the world. Everybody has experience to share. So how do we carve out some of the best practices from all of them and turn them into viable digital goods or viable techno-legal approaches or operating frameworks that could be useful for practitioners anywhere around the world? And that is basically the genesis and the motivation behind creating something that we call the Open AgriNet Alliance, which is an alliance or a network of practitioners, organizations, governments, and researchers around the world. What we intend to solve for is we take a deeper look at the issues pervading the agriculture sector across jurisdictions in the global north and south as well, and then look at forward-looking solutions using the power of open source technologies, using the power of the private sector contributions, as well as the right legislative and policy formulations that could solve for this. And some of the key motivations or the large agendas that we're looking to address via this, basically three, purely looking at from the lens of the core beneficiary classes like the farmers and the farming livelihoods and practitioners involved. We are hopeful about creating some kind of a knowledge commons for the world where there are like some of the best advisory practices around growing certain crops in certain topologies. If there is a way to abstract all of them and bring it to the fore so that practitioners in other geographies could also piggyback on or learn from, building the right digital infrastructure in terms of trust and other critical tools which could be made available as open source goods for the practicing communities, and also articulating the right operating models for viable commercialization opportunities for farmers, because ultimately that's what leads to their livelihood improvements, right? So these are the problem statements that we are trying to address using this effort of the community, and Yeah. And if you were to look at where Open AgriNet stands right now, it was an alliance that was set up about 3 months ago. We are grateful for the fact that 60-odd organizations around the world in 5 continents and 100-plus practitioners across these several disciplines have joined forces. Now we are in the process of creating several of these pathways. When I speak about pathways, these are effectively like what kind of digital public infrastructure pathways are useful for countries to adopt, what kind of AI frameworks could we think of so that it's actually put to use on the ground in practicing environments, instruments for better data observability or better dashboards and so forth, and the right policy mechanizers, plus along with the fact that a lot of these efforts, if we were to coming from a small pool of practitioners in one country, it can be co-created by experts around the world. So that's an effort that we are currently in the process of. And ultimately, if you were to design for and implement such large agri-DPI networks or models, what kind of playbooks or operating models could we think of? So we think the idea is to bring in the best of what has worked in several jurisdictions and apply it into some kind of a common blueprint for countries to work on. Yeah, more on the lines of what Dr. Boniface said and the slide that I spoke about earlier, the tooling that would be made available through this alliance are on the left side. So there would be efforts to actually build open source goods around data registries, around discovery and fulfillment networks and protocols. There would be open source goods around credentials and agriculture assets, decision support tools, AI, algorithms, small and large language models, as well as viable telemetry tools for data observability. Now, all of this being brought to the fore so that these are meant and applied for real life use cases on the ground by farmers and the farming livelihoods. I'll quickly cut through this, but the point is the idea of such digital building blocks being applied in a national mission could result in potentially large-scale agriculture grids where every farmer is connected to the rest of the community, including the markets, the credit lenders, and the governments and other institutions, so that viable interactions can happen. They have access to all the knowledge that is available to them, but also at the same time they have access to the right market opportunities so that there are viable means for them to sell their produce at the best rates. So all of this is a mechanism by which can be addressed by fast-tracking these digital goods brought through the playbooks that hopefully the Alliance will build in the coming days. And while we also speak about our own experience, for example, in India and a few other geographies, say in Brazil or Southeast Asia, what we have also learned is sometimes all these DPI missions does not necessarily have to be seen from completely top-down lens. It's great that governments can take a role, but it also requires an equitable participation from communities on the ground. So several of our efforts while they qualify from the lens of DPI, these efforts are also being led completely from the grassroots. These are bottoms-up innovation that's actually happening. Local communities embracing these DPI building blocks to create hyperlocal networks, in the case of agriculture in India, which is then translating into a mobilization effort wherein districts or provinces or cities on the ground are creating these kind of networks and then coalescing into a large national grid. As you can see on the slide, so over the past few months, the OAN community, along with DPI experts who are part of that alliance, have been working fairly actively in 3 geographies right now, along with Brazil and South America as well. There are several such efforts underway, wherein pan-country knowledge grids for agro-advisory are being created. There are some of these hyper-local agri-fulfillment networks that are being implemented on the ground right now. There are viable different models for agro-commerce and rural livelihoods being experimented in a bunch of jurisdictions. And while all of this is actually happening, there is a very thriving open source community of practitioners around the world who are actively creating goods and contributing back to the alliance, which is then fed back to the implementers in different countries as well. So this is a nice circle of innovation that is actually starting to form, and we hope to actually encourage this development even further. I'll cut through this, but a quick summary of Open AgriNet. What you can expect to see in the next 6 odd months is several such building blocks being put out through the alliance. There is a slide after which there is a website. There are repositories where you can have access to a lot of these ideas and tooling, much of which would be coming in the next couple of months. There will be open data assets being built for agriculture. There will be language models being built for agriculture. There will be a bunch of those unifying protocols that I spoke about also being put out for agriculture. It's a massive standardization exercise. It is something that will be co-created by experts around the world. And the idea is that once we put it out through the alliance, it is for the benefit of countries, including Kenya and everybody else, to actually use those assets and see if they can apply this into their respective agriculture missions. And last but not the least, it's a call to all of you. You're free to, by all means, please do check out the OAN website. There are practitioners from everywhere that I spoke about. What we hope to do in the next couple of months is kick off several such technical working groups wherein we'd want to co-create several of these digital public goods along with all of you. And it would be wonderful to actually have experts from within Africa also participate this along with the rest of us so that we can crack a diverse set of use cases that applies in various jurisdictions. So that's the hope, and there is a plan towards that. There would be a bunch of community calls that would be put out for all of you to participate, and my request to all of you is to actually explore this and join the alliance when the opportunity right fits you in. Yep, and that's pretty much it. I know it's been a little long, and I hope this was useful, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rajesh, for that. And I've seen one of the things that you mentioned there is an open platform, open source, a lot of open. And I think we also had that conversation with Sheena some time ago when we were talking about DPIs. That was like 2 weeks ago. And talking about what Kuza is doing with their open network, I think something of that sort. So yeah, just moving on swiftly so that we can save on time. I'd like to call Christian from GIZ to talk about AIEP and some of the work that you're doing on DPI. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. I would like to get a little bit more hands-on now and give you a showcase and real-world example of how we actually follow a DPI approach and pair it with the utilization of AI to disrupt public extension and advisory systems. So this is about the so-called Agricultural Information Exchange Platform, a project funded by the Gates Foundation and facilitated by us from GIZ to support the development of so-called minimum viable products of the platform that we do with 4 selected cohorts. So what is the use case? I think it's fair to say that public extension systems often fall short to provide relevant information at scale. Digital solutions can help, and we have seen a few very good examples also in this event, but they often lack personalization and offering information in preferred languages and on preferred channels. So that is actually what we try to solve, utilizing recent advancements in digital technologies and AI to provide that quality, diverse, personalized, and dynamic information to smallholder farmers. So the use case is basically Rose, a female farmer in Kenya, and we do that also in India, who looks for practical advisory with her feature phone, where she basically uses a conversational interface to ask questions and get a response that is automated and provided in her local dialect. And over time, the system learns from the usage behavior and then will be able to adapt and provide increasingly personalized recommendations. And the whole system is also agnostic from the underlying data source and utilizes sources and information from different repositories. So how that maps onto a DPI and also a DPG approach. We are looking into abstraction layers of 4 different kinds. First of all, we want to abstract, as I said, from data and content and underlying repositories. We want to have an information exchange module that automatizes information exchange, and that's the big promise in terms of reaching scale. And then we also want to personalize and provide a two-way communication in local languages directly to farmers and extension officers. That, on top of it, is offered via various channels, be it IVR, social media, mobile apps, and the like. So on all these 4 layers, we want to, as Boniface introduced, provide cross-cutting digital public goods that can be reused and orchestrated into local DPI projects per country. So some of the examples of the DPGs that we're going to develop are ag-specific language data sets. We're collecting voice examples and the like to make foundational models work for specific sectors. We want to provide a so-called golden Q&A, a validated data set of the most commonly asked Q&As. We also want to provide ag sector fine-tuned AI models. And if I talk about ag sector, I mean smallholder farming, ag-specific models. And then often has been talked about retrieval augmented generation. That's one of the key technologies to provide contextual information and to engineer the prompts for large language models in a way that allows relevant answers from the system. And then on the user interface, we're also looking into white label chatbots, so that can all be reorchestrated into meaningful DPI implementations per country. So those are the 4 cohorts. They are engaging in India, Bihar, as well as Kenya. It's DUNAC with a few CG organizations and partners. It's Digital Green and partners, Viamo and partners, and Tech4Her, which is DHAT and Dahlberg, basically. And they're looking into various value chains, and they're also looking to provide different channels, ranging from mobile apps, from IVR to social media. And they also utilizing language AI in different ways, basically using a large language model, but also other NLP technologies like machine translation, text-to-speech, and speech recognition and synthesis. So most important is to provide the interface in English and beyond, so local languages, for instance in Swahili, Gikuyu, but also Hindi, Bhojpuri is covered already, but there is more to be done, and luckily there are investments planned to change that. In terms of user reach, we still small scale. I think Digital Green is the largest with about 8,000 farmer reach in Kenya, and the others are looking into a few hundreds, up to 2,000 on the Tech4Her side, reaching extension officers mainly. So those are a few screenshots. I will show a bit of a demo example in case of Digital Green, since they provide the solution on the largest scale in Kenya, but there is more from DINAC with their Isaki mobile app. There is more from Tech4Her that also integrates the chat and voice bots into their larger service portfolio, and Viamo very much specializing on IVR, interactive voice response, that they apply across sectors successfully also in East Africa and elsewhere. So how does it look like in case of Digital Green? This is just a quick screen cam that gives you an impression how the user can interact with the system and how to ask questions and get generated advice.
To generate a query with Farmer Chat. The bot interprets the query and provides a reply in text form, but also can be played back through a generated voice.
Using cover crops in rice farming can be highly beneficial for improving soil health.
Based on the reply, the users will provide feedback and fill out a form which informs our team on how to improve the bot further. Additionally, users can submit photos of crop pest and diseases and get care or mitigation options from the bot.
So I hope it got clear how you can interact. You can use your natural language, either ask your question in text or with a voice note, and you get a generated answer. And that works also in local languages, but this was an English version, of course. And also embedded are videos and photos that can also be utilized to have access to additional services. Field testing is very important to get early feedback. This is some impressions of our work in Bihar, in India, and also in Kenya. And as you can see, mostly it's also working with a feature phone, and surprisingly also in noisy environments. I witnessed it myself. It provides in about 80% of all questions quite a meaningful answer so far. So I think there is some proof of concept, but there's still a lot to be done. Some lessons learned that I would like to share is that this is really a complex implementation. There is no one organization who can deal with it alone. We need to have multidisciplinary partnerships and capacities, and that's why we're going the cohort way, and that's why we also foster collaboration between cohorts and between ecosystem players. Language AI like NLP offer promising avenues, but there are still issues that we need to overcome and that require careful validation, human oversight, and consideration of local context. Domain data, and this is really about smallholder farming systems, is not AI ready. So I think we need to combine our power, and I'm really happy to also be part of the Open AgriNet that Rajesh introduced, to really make this happen, and that data sharing, the fourth lesson learned, is taking place on a larger scale. This is not easy, and we see that already on the small scale with these 4 cohorts. They all develop on their own a nice MVP, but if it's coming to collaboration and thinking beyond their own boundaries, this is quite challenging and require a very good design of collective incentives. So this is really a call for action if we want to provide DPGs that can be reorchestrated into larger DPI initiatives. This really requires standardized approaches, including open protocols, to exchange data and to really interoperate between different software components. So this is really promising, but I think we're only at the start, and this requires collective road mapping and action planning. So looking forward to interact with some of you on this challenge, and happy to get in contact individually, since we really want to scale that not only in India and Kenya, but also elsewhere. So if you're interested in, please feel free to approach me. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian. We have one more presentation. Unfortunately, actually, we were to get another presentation from Patrick Karanja from Tony Blair Foundation, but unfortunately was not able to make it due to unavoidable circumstances. So our next presentation is actually online, and I'm hoping that the internet will be able to hold here. So I don't know whether Batram is online and you can put him up. Okay, there we are. Batram, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. Do you want to share your presentation and then take it off from here?
Yes.
Great.
I hope my presentation is visible.
It is. Go ahead. Do you mind, sorry, Bartram, do you mind putting it on slide mode? Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'd like to cover in this presentation today very quickly is how in India multiple digital public infrastructures across multiple sectors. Agriculture has been very unique in its outreach as well as in its implementation strategy, and I'll just quickly touch upon that. So, three questions which we really looked to solve for. One was, who is the farmer? How do we solve for identity? Because in a large diverse country, getting a unique identity and also ensuring that there's no duplication of multiple entities to the same farmer ID is something which was the foundational requirement. Building on top of that, what are the other registries which are core? So how do we link plot data, land data, and crop data to this farmer's identity? So that became really core, and these were then referred to as core registries. Beyond the core registries, there was also then the need for subsequent supporting registries, which was taken up in a separate phase. But these three registries really built the foundation of the entire Agri DPI. So three layers that we really looked at in terms of our strategy of how this was built. One was ensuring that the data exchange layer in a country, like I mentioned, India has multiple states, and each state is like a country in itself. So having those states speak the same language, being interoperable with each other, and giving data in the same response to a similar request is what the data exchange layer really solved for right at the bottom of this stack. The second layer that we also built in as part of the design was the consent layer. And a consent layer in a world which is increasingly taking care of the farmers, not just identity, but also data privacy, is something that we put right into the design. And I will touch upon it in a slide or two. And the third layer is what we focused on, which is the access and innovation, which is the moment you have the bottom two in place. The top layer is where the ecosystem really comes together and builds on top of the digital infrastructure. So these were the four design elements really that came together to build out the Agri DPI in India. The first being the core registries that I spoke about. The second, the unified data exchange, everyone speaking the same language and data standards. The third is building consent into the data sharing and not sharing data without explicit consent, especially when it is farmer personal information. And the last is making technology and infrastructure extremely scalable right from the onset by design. So keeping it simple at the core and then building all the innovation and customization at the edges. This screen talks a little bit about the consent management, and I think this is a very unique step that we took at designing and testing it in the market. What you see here is a consent form. So after data is requested by a data seeker from the farmer's database, this is a link which goes to the farmer clicks on it and actually has to go through who's seeking this data for what period of time is it being sought for, which is mentioned right at the bottom of the screenshot, and subsequently looks at all the different data points which are going to get shared. And some of these data points we build by design the ability for the farmer to toggle on and toggle off. So this also allows for something called partial consent, where if the farmer is not comfortable with sharing multiple types of crops, he also wants to not share all the land information, they can share partial information. And this was extremely powerful when tested in the market. It brought in a huge amount of transparency and trust. The second piece, which I spoke about, which was the data exchange layer, talks a little bit about what are the different types of data points around the farmer. How do you keep the farmer in the center and bring everything about that farmer, right from demographic details to land, crop, and also government schemes, livestock data, farm machinery, and other credit-related information if necessary, so that if an entity needs to look at the farmer from a lending perspective or giving financial aid perspective, or from a subsidy or other dimensions, it gives a very holistic picture of the individual. So this is why we built data exchange, keeping in mind the immediate core registries and subsequent registries that really need to talk to each other. Last but not the least is the way we designed the use case for agri-lending. In a country like India, financial services is something which is pretty much the most required service. And for most of the farmers, you go to them and ask them, what is the one thing that you need the most? They would say, we need funds to go and invest in our crop, in our equipment. And that's something which by design, we found that a lot of the lending machinery was extremely fragmented because of further fragmentation of data. So the flows on the screen really show you how a before the DPI flow, which is the one on top, worked. And it was extremely broken. It had a high failure rate in terms of giving a disbursement to the farmer. And the flow below talks about how with DPI powering this data to a financial institution, there is a much higher degree of trust, transparency, and visibility that a lender can really underwrite a loan on. And that's something which has also been tested in the market in a very controlled manner and is something that has now been enabled for a few pilot states in the country, and it's now going through a national rollout as we speak. That's it from my side. I would be very keen to support some of the work that's also happening in this part of the world and bring in our experience and learning from India, building multiple digital infrastructures for the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bartram. You've actually made it in record time, and we thank the internet gods for holding us until you finished your presentation. I want to give the panel an opportunity to come here. Please, somebody help us remove this podium. And as we do that, maybe I can ask everyone to stand. Let's stretch a bit, let the blood flow so that we can, be ready for the next session. Okay, there's a lost set of keys here. Please see Grace if you've lost your keys. All right, so let's stretch. Both hands up. Both hands up. Yeah, stretch. Reach for the roof. Reach for the sky. Okay, so down, down. Yeah, slowly. Don't break something. Yeah, down. Yeah, down. And let's go up. Slow, 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 slow. Let the blood flow. Let the blood flow. Then we go down for the last one. Last one. Slowly. All right, then we can have our seats. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. May I call the panelists to be here? Charlene, Annie Ghosh from CGR. And sitting here. Good. Sheena. There's a design flow here. Siaka mentioned it about the stairs. Yeah, the stairs were put there, not somewhere here. Yeah. All right, so I'll let Charlene take over.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We have the privilege of being your last session, so we shall try to be as entertaining as possible. My name is Charlene Migwe. I'm from an institution called Karibu Digital. And we've had a lot of technical conversations and use cases around DPI. Quite illuminating because we're thinking about what DPI is. I think Dr. Boniface spoke to us about the approach, think about it about more of approach. Collective came up a lot, whether it's open. think about trust and context. And this panel, the idea around this panel is to really cement that into what are practitioners doing it, how is it being applied, and what are the lessons learned from practitioners themselves. We have governments in the room, we have private sector, research institutions, and also teams that are building digital public goods. And because of time, we'll go through and just, as we talk about the questions, you can introduce yourself. And I'll start with Annie. Do you have a mic? Yeah. Perfect, yeah, we can hear you. Okay, so I'll start with Annie. And Annie is from CGIR. If you're in agriculture, we all know CGIR for the incredible research they do. And we've seen them grow in terms of the impact they have in the digital ecosystem. And if you think about it from an ecosystem approach and a community approach, where we're thinking about, for example, in Kenya, we have development, implementation, and scaling of digital public goods. Really, what does that mean from an ecosystem level? When we think about open source communities of contributors, mentors, organizations, I think the speakers before mentioned the importance of community and aggregation of different digital systems. How do you propose that should work?
Yeah, so, in the morning, we had a session on localization of AI, right? Our thematic area was localization of AI. But this whole discussion that was revolving around there is how do we bring in the, all the ecosystem players together, right? So it's like whatever I will be saying now, it might not be new, but it's basically a recap from what we have been hearing throughout the day, right? So first of all, the localized development with the local ecosystem players is quite important because we are all talking about localized solutions, right? The solution that we are developing, it needs to be locally relevant, it needs to be contextualized, and it should be solving local problems, right? So there needs to be this kind of collaboration happening between the different ecosystem players, and that's basically coming from the innovators. That would be the last mile delivery partner, and that would farmer who is the recipient. One of the things that we often forget in this ecosystem is who are the farmer, who is not only the recipient, but we also need to think about it. I have heard hearing this from Sri quite a few times, is what this kind of services are giving like an agency to the farmer who is receiving this information or who is receiving the services. So the key goal is here that when we are talking about the local ecosystem, it needs to involve every one of them. And then at the same time, there is a big, push that is needed in terms of, be on the transparency and the open source side, right? Like we heard quite a bit about data exchange. We heard about, open source solutions. And also in the AI session, there was a discussion around, the farmers who are receiving the information, they need to know that this is coming from AI, right? So it needs to be transparent as well. So yeah, so this would be my take on the comments around the discussion around how the localized solutions of the ecosystem should work.
Yeah. So a lot around transparency and looping in the farmers in terms of co-design. Is this happening? And if not, how do we make this happen?
The second to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you look at the successful examples, this is happening. If the examples are not successful, yeah, definitely, there is something wrong, and that's the reason why that is not happening, right? Yeah, I don't want to go into the details of the various solutions, but definitely this is something, who are serious about the development, they are really looking into that.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'm excited to have you, Sheena, on the panel, especially when we talk about private sector's role and value in terms of digital public infrastructure. And as Kuza, we've seen you and the team create the world's first open agriculture network, the Kenya Open Network, with other panelists here, protocol. So I think first is to maybe introduce what that's, and really to talk about what motivated private sector to be involved in digital public infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Great question. I hope you can hear me. I speak very fast, so if I'm too fast, just do this and I'll slow down. But really, I think everybody actually on this table, you guys said it all. When you said agriculture is complex, not one party can solve it all. So us, as an agri-tech startup, we can definitely not solve it on our own. But we have seen a lot of people try, right? Like if you look at Kenya and you look at the agri-techs that have tried, investors, and one of the things I've learned is what went wrong. So we had some big ag-techs, right? We had DigiFarms, we've got Twiga, lots. We've got 1 Acre Fund, which is a great example of a model. So what is it? What's different, right? What can we do differently? And I think the idea is having an open model. One party cannot solve it on its own. So what Kuza said is, we definitely know we cannot solve this on our own. But what we can do potentially is create an open model where everybody who has their strengths can plug in. So for example, excited to be sitting next to Salim and Kalro in government. Government has a huge role, and I'm sure he'll talk about all the cool stuff they've been doing with farmer registry, etc. There's a huge role to play. You've got other ag techs. I mean, every day I hear about a new ag tech with a new solution, whether it's climate, whether it's this. Great, that has a good role to play. Finance providers, if you're in the room, you have a huge role to play, and you're not playing your role because the money that the farmers and the agripreneurs and the agricultural value chain needs is not getting to the people who need it. So there's a role for financial institutions, donors, academics. So excited to have you in the role because you can do all this awesome climate smart research. If it doesn't get to the farmers, if it doesn't get to the people, it's not going to work. So Kuza realizes we can't do this on our own. And actually, there's a really great approach, DPI, open networks, and there's great technology, the Beacon protocol, which enables these things to happen so other people can plug in. So what we decided is, what are we good at? Well, we're good at two things. We're good at people and platform. We've built this amazing digital marketplace, basically, which connects farmers to service providers, finance providers, off-takers, etc. And what else we're very good at is people. So we have created, and people call them agents, we call them agripreneurs. We have created this amazing group of young people in the country they're in the village that they're in, to form a trusted network, a trusted connection, a human face and a technology face, to kind of work with groups of farmers. So young people connect to farmers, connect them to all the technology which enables them to connect with different players. That's what we've done. Why we've done it? We know it's not going to work alone. We know we can't do this on our own, but it's very important that this gets done. And enough of us talk about collaboration. Every single person in this room talks about collaboration, but let's be honest, we're also competing. We're competing for financing, maybe we're competing for attention, we're competing for, I don't know, news coverage or whatever it is. So there are bits where we will compete and there are bits where we'll collaborate. And the DPI framework, why we're excited about this, is where we can collaborate, it'll help us collaborate.
Just to follow up on that, for people to get better context on the Open AgriNet platform, the Kenya One network. If I'm a private sector, how do I plug in, or what value can I derive from it?
Great. So the whole point about private sector is private sector will only plug in if there's value. If there's no value, it doesn't matter how great it is, private sector is not going to plug in. So at the heart, so think about it from a private sector perspective. Private sector is not one person. So if I'm an off-taker and I'm in Kenya, what are my biggest challenges? My biggest challenge is I want consistent quality produce, right? If I'm selling mangoes, I want to make sure every month, every week I get it. If Kenya One Network enables me to connect with farmers who can provide this for me, I will connect. If I'm an input provider and I want to sell my seeds or my fertilizer, I want farmers who want to buy. So if Kenya One Network allows me to do that, then I will buy. So in essence, if Kenya One Network cannot create value, and the truth is we have created value. There's $20 million, and I think it's gone up now, sorry Sri, I get the numbers wrong, worth of transactions that have happened in Kenya in 13 counties in 3 years. This doesn't sound like a big number to all the big folks sitting here, right? $20 million. But this is done by young rural agripreneurs in the villages, in counties. So value is happening. These things are already happening. Because we're showing value, private sector want to part in. But I think we really need to think, private sector is not going to join something because it sounds cool or is part of it. Nope, that's not why they're going to join. They're going to join because we're adding value, and government can add value as well.
Thank you for that. So it's a really good use case of how you're leveraging technology and also the human resource and the volunteers on the ground, but then how do you make sure the network grows over time by creating value?
And sorry, they're not volunteers.
Sorry,
yeah,
okay.
They're agripreneurs.
They are?
They're agripreneurs. We don't,
Agripreneurs.
again, we train them, they see a business opportunity, they make money, and they're sustainable. If they're not sustainable, if as a donor we're constantly paying them stipends to do training, the model will fail.
Yeah.
They have to see an entrepreneurial opportunity in there. It is at the heart of the model.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for that. Salim from Calro. We've seen Calro do a lot. We've seen Calro's technical infrastructure grow over the years. We've seen Calro be a spearheader in terms of the role of government in terms of data governance and digital transformation. But as we think about DPI's momentum growing across Africa, efforts are needed to make African governments have the tools, knowledge and skills to implement their own DPI in agriculture. So what do you think the key success factors are based on what you've learned within Calro and any other early initiatives that the Ministry of Agriculture or Calro are doing that we could showcase and talk about?
Thank you so much. Indeed, when we look at the Kenya Digital Ag Journey, I think we have been traveling for quite some times, and we have reached at a point whereby the demand from the ecosystem is so intense to an extent that we really need to define a technology that can really come in and try to address all these challenges that we face in the ag sector, mostly now from the government side. And it's true that the momentum for the DPI is continuing to increase. And here we are looking at government, mostly in the Kenyan, is part of it. I know Calro, we have been spearheading all this revolution. But looking at now from the African context, there are some key factors that African government need to look at. I'll just mention some few. And I think the first one is the African government commitment and leadership towards PECT as one of the success factor should be the African government need to prioritize DPI and put it as a national agenda. And through this commitment, they should be able to reflect the DPI implementation either through policy frameworks and also support scaling innovation around digital products. And then the other factor that the government can play as a success factor is now looking at the African context and then now be able to have a localized solution but scalable solution. We need to treat African ag ecosystem in a very unique way, looking at the farming enterprises, looking at the different climate variability within the African landscape, also looking on issues of social economics and the different farm management practices. So here we are looking at a tailor-made solution that can address the massive number of smallholder farmers within the African context, and then now be able to do a tailor-made automation, but now at a scale. Then the other thing that we can see that the African government and leadership should be able to embrace is public-private partnership. I can talk for the Kenyan setup. I come from a government perspective. We realize, like in Kenya, we have around 6.7 million farmers. These are mostly smallholder farmers living in a different setup. Again, the government alone, through the Ministry of Agriculture, they cannot be able to reach out to all these millions of farmers. So we need private actors to come in, number one, to double up extension efforts in the last mile, but mostly important, the private sector comes in with the development partners. So here we are looking at how can we be able to bridge the financial support and gap, and this is through functioning public-private partnership. And then maybe lastly, we are looking at, for the government to have a success DPI implementation, we need to look at the backbone and the foundational infrastructure. And this is purely a foundational ICT infrastructure, that it can be able to promote, number one, massive data storage, massive data analytics, and also promote real-time data exchange within all the actors from the ag sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think great points on policy, and I enjoyed your angle on scaling already existing innovations that are tailor-made for our context. So really great points from you. And I think I'll move on to Kirti from Open AgriNet. Yeah. So we've heard a lot about Open AgriNet earlier today. And we've seen Open AgriNet be a leader in how we bring in AI as a catalyst of DPI. We've heard a lot about this in different panels on how AI can be the final push for us to realize the value of DPI. How have you been able to, as a team, bring these two concepts together, and what value have you seen so far from this approach?
Thank you, Charlene. I think I'm the only panel member sitting without my notes. I'm going to speak what comes to my mind. So forgive me if I digress a bit. So I come from India, where we celebrate unity in diversity. That's the philosophy we always promote. Now, DPI provide you the foundational infrastructure for interoperability, connectivity. But what AI enables is to optimize and scale up on, leverage that infrastructure to provide context, serve the last mile farmers or the last mile agricultural ecosystem players. You can use AI for things like providing advisory to farmers in their local language, be it Kiswahili, Gikuyu. You can use AI, like Christian mentioned earlier today, that RAG pipelines for giving them contextualized information. AI can be used to develop models, weather prediction models, or it could be market intelligence, and also understanding what the dynamic needs of farmers are. AI can, and I think somebody in the morning was talking about the AI being able to make sense of the complex data that is coming into this digital infrastructure that the government is creating. So AI helps us leverage these digital public infrastructure and take it to the last mile and solve problems which are the real pain points. So the way we at Open AgriNet look at it, that AI enables to solve problems where we're not solving for the farmers, we're solving with the farmers. We are trying to solve problems that resonate with the use cases that they're looking for. This is how we approach it. What we try to do is we try to understand the local problems. Structure is at a top layer, it's a foundational infrastructure. It appears to be top-bottom, but the use cases, what we try to do is they should emerge from the grassroots. So creating these grassroots movements, which at the end talk to this digital public infrastructure, the open network and standards which Open AgriNet will be specifying. That's the idea, and that's how we want to use AI.
Yeah, I think a really great point. I think we saw it to the AIEP project on context and delivering content, context-specific content to the farmers, and how AI can make use of large models of data. Great, so I think I'll come back to you, Annie. Lastly, thinking through DPI, we've discussed a lot about how DPI can harness local expertise and making sure we foster partnerships across sectors to drive social economic growth earlier today. What are some key lessons you've learned from country-level DPI implementation in agriculture? It might not be agriculture, but we could borrow from other sectors. What have you really seen work at the country level?
Yeah, this is a great question, right? So I was brainstorming with Boniface before coming here. Like, what are the examples of DPI? I was writing examples. He was just crossing that out. Like, no, this is not. So we discuss a lot of the potential, but what are the real examples, right? I can think about two. One is the Indian one, the Aadhaar system, which is the unique digital identity, but that is not agriculture, but that is definitely powering, that will definitely power a lot of the agricultural development there. But I'll come back to the Kenyan example. I think it was mentioned in the morning, which is the Million Farmer Network. And that basically happened back in 2020, 2019. And 30 companies, if I'm not wrong, they were basically brought in as a kind of a PPP model, and a lot of investment was made. Some investment was made in the private sector, and some investment made was in the public sector. And that basically helped to achieve what Kenya is, or Calder is doing today. So some of the things are like, for example, the cross-sectoral partnership I think that was fostered during that period, with different companies providing different services enabled by the, the farmer data that was generated at that point of time. Really helped the companies to grow from 3,000 to 300,000. The second one was, building trust with the local state actors, going to the level of the, different, in Kenya, it would be the different local regions, and getting their, buy-ins. That was a great success factor. The third one is the investment in the infrastructure. The Calro big data infrastructure, right? The investment kind of came in through there, and then that basically fueling in also or supporting the, the upcoming, all the, work that Calro is doing. I'm sure that is contributing a lot. And then definitely the capacity, right? This first generation of the AgTech as well as the public sector, agriculture researcher, and the discussion around big data and everything, that started around that part. So, there is a lot to learn from it. I'm sure, we will be talking that in the near future year. But one of the things that I also want to mention that, in the 13th Mercy Corps AgriFin Learning Event, we should not be again talking about these two or scratching for, more examples. Like we need to have, by that time, hopefully we'll have more successful examples that we can, celebrate about.
Thank you. Salim, I'll go next to you because you've raised good points. At the next AgriFin, we want examples, not talking of potential, but actual examples. And thinking through Calro's role and the example that he's given, and from what you've learned over the years, implementing infrastructure or the different, how can we remove, or what needs to really be done for governments to adopt digital public infrastructure?
Thank you. From government perspective, any investment on digital and data, it's basically considered as a soft investment. And us from government side, we usually experience hard time to convince the top leadership, mostly the political classes, on why they should invest heavily on data and also on digital. And the reason being that most government officers do not really understand the benefit of having or setting up a DPG or a DPI infrastructure. And the most unfortunate part is that all this data and digital investment requires an upfront investment before you could realize the fruits of this. So some of the barriers that we really experience is, of course, most top leadership are not aware of what this technology can bring about. And then the second biggest barrier is resource and financial constraint, of course, because when we talk about setting up a DPI, we need to first establish some physical computing hardware infrastructure, which requires massive investment into it. Luckily, in Kenya, we had already started through this journey. We have the big data infrastructure. Then now, secondly, is to invest on the registries itself. Last year, the country spent closer to 2 billion Kenyan shilling to set up the farmer registry. This is a massive investment. And I was part of the team. I could see the struggle that we had convincing the national government itself, going back to the counties, also convincing them that they need to allocate a bigger chunk of their budget to invest on just farmer register. So it was not being bought, it was not going on well, because to the political elected class, they want tangible output that they can show to their people that indeed we have done A, B, C, D, could you kindly elect me next time? But when we talk about data, how can you take glory on data? And yet here I come and tell them, you see, with the data, I can connect your farmer to markets, can connect your farmer to subsidized program. They are not really feeling that. Then the other biggest barrier has been, we all know the government remuneration. DPI, DPG requires onboarding of the new expert, the new discipline, new emerging discipline like data science, data engineering, AI engineering, ML engineers are coming on board. So how can you convince a mere PS that You need to hire someone that can be paid 1 million per month, for instance. So it doesn't sell well. So we are faced with this challenge that we cannot attract talents. And if we can try to attract these talents, we can't even retain these talents. So those are some of the barriers. Then lastly and most important, I think Boniface had talked about this very much. It's on having a proper regulation framework policy. We need to define a policy that can accommodate data use, data reuse, and then now, and at the same time promoting transparency of this data whereby all these actors can be able to access this data. So those are some of the barriers that we experience.
Excellent point. Thank you, Salim. I think thinking through when you hit the ground running, what really does a government need? So you brought up good points on skill sets that is often overlooked. Is the government willing to invest in building the skill sets and hiring the right people, infrastructure? Excellent points on what really needs to be beyond just the technology. What needs to be in place in government, right? Did you have something to add? Okay. So I think I'll move to Sheena. So interesting work on the Kenya One network. It'd be good to hear what's next. What do you think would take, and thinking through when a private sector takes up such technologies, how do you scale it up? What does it mean to you? Like what value, even for you as Kuza, moving forward? And as you said, they're not volunteers, they're actually agripreneurs. How will you scale it up and bring up more private sector on board?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the things that we're seeing is there's a huge demand for something like Kenya One Network. And that demand is coming from the private sector, it's coming from all aspects. Now, it's great having a soil registry, a farmer registry, and all the registries that government does, and it's government's job, right? Government's job is to create an enabling environment. But if the private sector don't use it, then it becomes a waste. So you need to find a way to create these registries, great, yes, and I think what Carlo is doing with support is step one. Because government's job is to create that enabling environment, and data is a huge part of it. But number two, you now need to make sure the private sector is aware of it, knows how to use it, and leverage it. So why is a farmer registry, for example, important? Because now, for planning purposes, I can tell that there are these many farmers in this area. 80% farmers in, Kakamega that are growing, let's just say, maize. But I want to set up a mango factory or a potato factory or whatever it is. As a private sector person, I can now think, where should I set up my factory so that I know where the farmers are, I know where the good soil is, and that means I will get consistent demand. So ideally where we're trying to move to the dream state is climate change. We're suffering the most, right? Now that is the reality of it. What can we then do? So again, having those kind of decisions like, right, where should irrigation be a factor? Where do we have natural rivers? What can we do? Data-driven. Now, that value can only come if the private sector sees the benefit of it. So for private sector, there needs to be a use case. So, like I said, with the Kenya One Network, and remember, we keep calling this Kenya One Network. There's no Kuza anywhere. As part of Kuza's investment, as part of Kuza's sort of approach to DPI, to partnerships, we're saying it's not the Kuza One Network, it's the Kenya One Network. We can't do it on our own. And so what we're saying is, here's the technology, we've opened it. So if you want to plug in, if you're a digital marketplace, if you're an off-taker, if you're this, plug in. On the other side, everybody can plug in. All of the private sector people can plug in. But if we don't have farmers who are trained, who don't have agripreneurs who know how to access this, then it's not going to work. So what Kuza is doing right now, and what we have done very successfully, is we've got, we're in almost all of the counties in Kenya. I'll just give the Kenya example. We've got 2,000 agripreneurs from each county who work with 200, 300 farmers each. So we're building that side. So we now actually, for the first time, have a really good side of trained agripreneurs and farmers who could meet the requirements of the private sector. So now what's next is you onboard the private sector. And by private sector, I think what we're doing as Kuza is we're starting with an MVE. We like to call it MVE, minimum viable ecosystem. Everybody says MVP. We're saying no, MVE. So let's bring, farmers, maybe in 1 county, 5 counties, 10 counties. Let's bring 5 financial providers. Let's bring 5 off-takers. Let's bring 15 service providers. And let's see this work, because things are going to go wrong on the ground. An off-taker will ask for something, farmers will grow it, but then the truck will break down, somebody will steal it. Okay, this is things we'll learn. Let's embed insurance, let's do this. So Kuza's next step is, we've done the foundation, we've done the building blocks. Now let's work together and sort of make it grow. So our call out to everybody in this room is, because I think everybody in this room has a role to play. Finance player, off-taker, input supplier, donor, academia. Let's do this, right? Like, I don't want to come here next year and talk about it. If next year we haven't done something, then honestly, shame on us.
Oh, wow, a call out from Sheena. Thank you. I think that's a really great point of building the infrastructure, the ecosystem around it, and then the private sector now can plug in over time. And I think, Kriti, last question for you as we wrap up. So we talk a lot about DPI as an approach. But then how, from, for example, the Kenya Open Network, all the different networks that you're building, I think Open Agri, the team spoke about it earlier. How does this translate from big picture to value for farmers, such as access to inputs? I think there's a lot of value we've been told that it can bring, but how does this really translate in actual sense?
Right. So while DPI translates as digital public infrastructure, and most of the times when we speak of DPI, it's usually network standards. What we speak about is the technology behind it. Yeah. But what's the most important aspect of it is the public, the P in between. Yeah. And like Rajesh spoke during his presentation, a very important community, and the community includes the practitioners, it includes the private sector players, the funders, the government, and pretty much everybody in the ecosystem. And rather than getting into the theory of it, I would like to give you an example of how we are trying to ensure that this high-level, big picture translates to real-life use cases. Infrastructure and extending across the country or continents, we are creating hyper-local pods. So in Nashik, which is a small district in the state of Maharashtra in India, we're working with the farmer-producer organizations, which is a collective of farmers, and they have about a few lakhs of farmers who come together and have some common pain points. So through open standards derived from the Beacon Protocol, we are trying to understand how we can bring in the agri-market players, the supply chain players, and the agri-input dealers into that ecosystem and solve the pain points of the farmers. We have identified a few pressing pain points. Some of them are access to credit, access to farm mechanization equipments, and real-time market information. So we are trying to create local experiments and see how it is translating into adoption by the farmers and other players in the ecosystem. So this is our approach to look at creating these minimum viable ecosystems, like Sheena said, or MVPs, whatever you would want to call it, but ensuring that the farmer needs are taken care of by the ecosystem.
Yeah. So I think ecosystem really plays a big role. It looks like building that ecosystem that the DPI can support. Now, to wrap up, we're out of time. In 3 words or few words for each panelist, I think we can start with you, Annie. What final words would you leave the audience on what we should focus on to achieve DPI that benefits farmers and moves beyond vision to impact?
Well, it's kind of easy one, right? So scaling technology versus scaling trust. So that would be my takeaway.
Great point. Sheena?
Join the Kenya One Network.
Salim?
I think for me is let's look at why are we embracing the DPI or the DPG. So whatever solution we are bringing out, let's put farmers' needs at the heart of every investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Kriti?
For me, it would be creating million grassroots revolutions.
Yeah.
Solving all the problems globally.
Yeah, locally. Yeah. Okay, great. I think we can give... we have time. I'll be given permission for some questions. If there's anyone who has a few questions to ask the panelists. I think Emmanuel says everything.
Thank you very much, our panelists. From what we have heard of you, it's very interesting. And I think it's just a matter of time. And we wouldn't let you go without giving you homework. And my direct question to you all in general is one subject. I've not heard of it since morning here. Or to introduce myself, I'm Joshua Adem, a director at Hope Hospice. When you've been talking about the DPI, it's quite amazing when it goes to agriculture. This touches the lives of all of us, human beings and animals. But I've not heard from all of you your statements, from all the points you've touched across on how do you handle the issue of the soil health and the crop health, so that as we go to the marketplace, the quality of what human beings and animals are consuming. And to be specific, we've heard in the morning when we were being told that the life expectancy in Kenya is 65. From there now you are living in a balance. Yes, but why is that? I'm from the health background. And my interest always is in the non-communicable diseases, whereby the most of the conditions we experience as human beings, they are from the lifestyles and what we consume. So my question is, what or how do you use the DPI to solve the issue of the produce in the marketplace to be of quality? I've not heard of that, so may you elaborate or give us the direction on how you are going to solve it through the DPI. Thank you very much.
Okay, permission to give it to Annie, I'm guessing, because of CJR's role in understanding.
Well, that's a difficult one, right? So just to give you an example, so you mentioned about soil health. So I'll just connect some dots. We did not talk about here how is soil health is being addressed. Like Million Farmer Network, there is another initiative coming up very soon. I'm giving concrete examples from Kenya that would exactly trying to address the challenge, right? So how do we improve the soil health? How do we better manage the fertilizer, application using this kind of, large-scale data set that might be available? We did not talk about the other component of the health because, primary focus of this conversation has been around agriculture, but that doesn't mean that, DPI is not being used for, help, in solving the medical challenges, because the first ever use of the data exchange, of sensitive data exchange, those comes from the medical sector, right? How do we get to the COVID vaccine so quickly? Because, the hospitals, they decided to share their data following a secure protocol, and the research was enabled. So, yeah, there are lots of other examples, but it's because of the platform, we did not focus on all of those. But the soil health, please keep an eye out on the events that will be happening in the next few months. There will be a large initiative, convened by World Bank that will be, trying to address that particular challenge.
Okay, lastly, Kirti, then we close.
Yeah, so I think, Joshua, what you're trying to allude to is the One Health approach that has been discussed a lot in healthcare. And within the Open AgriNet community, we have had discussion, should we have a One Agriculture approach too? Because agriculture is not just about the farmers, the players in the ecosystem. It's about the soil health. It's about the water table levels. So there are multiple ways to solve this problem. To highlight on your solution of how as a consumer, I know that my produce is, the product I'm consuming is produced responsibly. There are tracking mechanisms. I think there are organizations outside who are developing tracer tools where you can trace every element, where the input comes from, what kind of fertilizers were used. So with using this DPI, DPG approach, you'll have such open source tracing tools which can be used by end suppliers to demonstrate that their product is produced responsibly and sustainably.
Thank you. Thank you, Kriti. I think we'll wrap it up there, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I'd like to close this session. Because we don't have that much time, I'd like to ask Stuart to just come and close it for us.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I have to admit, way too late, I realized I should have been recording this entire session with ChatGPT and then played that back to you as a synthesis, because that was a lot of information, a lot of amazing insights and perspectives on defining DPI. Just as a little bit of a recap, Boniface gave us a definition. If you could bring up the slide that I gave you. Just next one, please. Okay, so coming in, this is sort of maybe what some people are thinking around DPI. Everybody has a slightly different view of what it is. They have a different perspective. They're touching a different piece of the elephant. Hopefully after Boniface's overview and the entire panel and groups, we all have a bit more of a collective view around what the whole picture looks like. You can take that down, thank you. So Boniface talked about, especially, I think one thing that stood out was infrastructure thinking. Rajesh went through the Open AgriNet and introduced that concept and lessons from India. Christian talked about the AIEP initiative, leveraging AI, but then sort of combining that with the DPI and DPG elements you need to make these solutions work. Bertrand brought lots of experience from building out the agri-stack, things like that are required that you don't necessarily think of straight away, like consent managers and making sure that farmers are giving consent to using their data. The panel, Annie gave some great examples around localization. Sheena, I think we all heard that call loud and clear about the Kenya Open Network. And then Salim, I think, really raised a great point of view around PPPs, and that's really what it's going to take. And then Kirti, I loved your sort of bringing up I think something that's unique about India is just that social good philosophy that has driven a lot of this in the Indian context. But in summary, I think just a few things that came out of all the panelists' discussions and points. DPI, in my mind, is it's a way to enable individual benefits at population scale. That's what we're really seeking to do. And that's going to take a collective approach. And DPI is not a technology, it's an approach. It combines the two, but I think I heard a lot more discussion around the approach in the community than I did about the technology during this session. There's sort of a balance that has to be struck between distributed and decentralized versus centralized, release of control, open versus proprietary, collaboration versus competition, where do you transition from one to the other? I think these are solvable problems, especially within this community. We heard a lot about open source, the ethical nature of designing these secure systems, consent. I talked about common data sharing challenges. But DPI can unlock so many services at scale. That's fundamentally what it enables. And Kenya's a fantastic case because we have so many ag tech innovators here. We heard about all of the AI solutions this morning. We've seen all the companies in the hallway working on these problems. Yet I would challenge this to say that a lot of our organizations in this space have struggled to scale, partly because DPI did not exist and has not existed before for them to build on. I always used to just empathize with a lot of the ag tech companies that we would hear pitches from, because you all have to build the entire stack yourself. There is no foundation to build on, and when you don't have a lot of capital available to you, yet you have to build that whole stack yourself, it makes it very challenging to succeed. So I think finding the approach where you have that foundation, you have a PPP approach, policy and governance around data. We heard some of that from Salim. I think, we've been thinking a lot about this at the Gates Foundation. We established a DPI team. So we have a whole program now. They're a functional team. They're cross-cutting across the entire foundation. They're there to support other programs. So I'm their liaison for agriculture. They have similar in education and health and finance. And so they've been, coming from the world of ID and payments. That's sort of where they established some of their work. But now they're looking at domain-specific DPI implementations. The example they always give, and I think it's just a fantastic demonstration of what DPI can achieve, is when Aadhaar, the national ID system, was introduced, at that time, India was looking at about a 47-year journey to get to 80% financial inclusion. And by instituting Aadhaar, national ID system, and combining that with financial services for the poor, they were able to get to 80% within 7 years. So that's just a massive acceleration of access to services. This is the power of DPI, and I think should be an incentive for all of us to work together on this. I'd love to come back, I think Annie said, at the 13th ALE and have a similar example for agriculture. Dimensional example we can use at the 13th ALE. So also I'm excited to see the competition that Boniface led down for Rajesh on, is Africa going to overtake India as far as being the lead in DPI? And looking forward to that. But I would say, my call to action would be to leverage this community. It's required shared assets that are needed for everybody to scale. And how do we sort of use that collective vision of raising smallholder farmers, small-scale producers out of poverty, improving livelihoods? We have a collective vision. Let's use that to establish some of these common digital public infrastructure components and digital public goods that we all need. So thank you. Looking forward to, I think, are we closing now? What's the next step? Okay, over to Sieka. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Round of applause. Great. I know it's been a long day. We just have an hour and a half left, just an hour and a half left of activities. So what we're going to do is we have a 10-minute break so that we could set up the room for some activity. In this room, I think in the room back there, Collins, if I'm not wrong, we will have a masterclass on agribusiness, impacts in climate context session, data collection run by CJR and CLIC. So that's going to be at the back there. And then there'll be two other master classes. One, a case study on drylands and climate information systems by ILRI in TALEC 2. And then a master class on assessing the commercial viability of business models by IDH in TALEC 1. So in 10 minutes, please go to those rooms. TALEC is way at the back there. There'll be also space here. We'll do the master classes for just about an hour, and then would really love it if you could come back here with us. So in 30 minutes, we celebrate
key achievements of some of our partners. So it's just a small award ceremony that would like to recognize some of our partners, and it'll be great if you guys could be part of that and we could cheer them on for the ones that we felt went up and above the cause. After that, of course, for those of you who can still stay, there'll be a cocktail where we can further network, share ideas, and kind of close this beginning of our collaboration and our year of working together. So would really love it if as many of you could also be part of that cocktail and would to join us to really celebrate the work that we've done over the last 2 days and of course share ideas moving forward. So 10 minutes, someone will be with the bells to let you know that the rooms are ready and we can dash to that, but go grab some coffee, and thanks everyone for being a great audience.